We were looking for life, hoping to find microscopic life, and now we're finding entire temple complexes is what appears to be on those images. Well, if it was only one image, you'd say maybe it's just a trick of light, and a trick of light in shadow. But it's not just one image. I want you to see some of the other images that NASA is releasing. When we look at the advanced civilizations on Earth, why did those civilizations collapse? What happened in the past? Is there something that could have happened then that we've forgotten? Or is it possible we can find out-of-place artifacts in other places, maybe like the moon? Well, something very interesting has happened. In the year 2016, so very, very recently, NASA has released its entire archive of lunar images taken of the lunar surface from the Apollo missions all the way from 1961 when they began through 1972. There are things on these images that NASA cannot explain, so they are called anomalous images. Some of them are so anomalous that they have been pixelated out so that we can't really see what they are, but we can still see the pixels. So there's something happening on the moon, and I want you to see some of these images, just a couple of them. I was an amateur archaeologist when I was in college. And one of the things, the very first things that I learned as an archaeologist is this. When we see 90-degree angles on an archaeological site, that tells us that it is in fact an archaeological site, that it is not a natural formation. Nature does not erode with wind in 90-degree angles, or nature does not erode through a stream or a river in 90-degree angles. So when you see a 90-degree angle like you're seeing on your screen right now, this is an excavated archaeological site that we're seeing an aerial view, and it's very clear to see the red lines are showing us where that 90-degree angle is. The next image that you're seeing, this is from the surface of the moon, and this is among the images that NASA released. You're seeing on the lower right-hand portion of the screen, you can see what looks like a little cube, and then in the upper right-hand portion, you're seeing what definitely is an enlargement of that cube. Those are definitely 90-degree angles. They are definitely made intentionally. They are not the result of erosion. The question is, what are they doing on the moon? We have been led to believe that the moon is a sterile surface, that there is no life existing on the moon, nor has there ever been. So when we begin to see things like this, and again, these images from 1961 through 1972, what do they mean? Well, if it was only one image, you'd say maybe it's just a trick of light, and a trick of light in shadow. But it's not just one image. I want you to see some of the other images that NASA is releasing. The Clementine mission to the moon came later, after the Apollo missions. So Clementine was a separate mission that went back to the moon, maybe to look a little closer at some of the anomalies that Apollo was seeing. And it's the Clementine images that we're finding pixelated, although they are released to the public. So you're seeing one now. There's obviously something here in the image that you're seeing that for whatever reason, we're not being allowed to see. What could that be on the surface of the moon? What is the out-of-place artifact that we're not seeing? Here's another one that looks more like some kind of a tower, perhaps, of some kind, or an obelisk that's been pixeled out. These are from the Clementine mission. Now, when people see things like this on the moon, the first thing that comes to mind is aliens, ETs, UFOs, things like that. And I fully believe, I'm certain, that we are not alone in this universe. It would make no sense for us to be. And that there's an overwhelming body of evidence suggesting now that other life forms have been with us for a very long time, both in our world and in other worlds. The astronauts have talked about this, those that have been interviewed. But I'm going to give you just a little bit different perspective. We are living a time of extremes. We are living a time when the cycles of conflict are ramping up. You don't need me to tell you that. You can feel the tension in the world, the push toward war. Doesn't mean that war needs to happen, but there are multiple places and hotspots where you can see right now, it wouldn't take much to create that. Okay, at the same time, something else is happening. During the Cold War years, there were only two nations that had the money and the technology to go to the moon. It's the former USSR, former Soviet Union, and the former United States of America. And I have to say that because both nations are so broke right now that we're not going back to the moon, at least in the way that we have in the past. But there are other nations that are going to the moon. During the Cold War, even though the former Soviet Union and former United States of America were at war on one level, it was a very civilized war in some respects because there were agreements among scientists on other levels. One of those agreements was that things that were found on the moon, for whatever reason, were not publicly shared among the people of the earth at the time. And I'm not going to say it's right, wrong, good, or bad. There were research programs that said that certain kinds of information could disrupt the fabric of society and overturn religious beliefs. And again, it was another world. This was the 60s and the 70s. But the point is, those agreements were honored, and I think that's one of the reasons we're not seeing some of these images. The nations that are now on their way to the moon, the nations that have the money and the technology and the will to return, were not part of those agreements. China, for example, India, are both on their way to the moon. And both nations have said that when they land on the moon, they will televise to the people of the earth whatever it is that they find live as they find it. Here's why I believe this is important. And this is a place where I'm moving beyond peer-reviewed science. I'm sharing with you my perspective, my sense, my belief. When we find those out-of-place artifacts on the moon, when we find archaeological remnants of intentional civilization in a place where we used to be hoping to find microbes. We were looking for life, hoping to find microscopic life, and now we're finding entire temple complexes, is what appears to be on those images. When we find those, my sense is that we're going to discover something that could be the most powerful, the most unifying experience the people, our global family, the people of Earth could ever have. Because my sense is that when we go into those ancient sites, we're going to find the hieroglyphs on the walls. We're going to find writing in languages that we already know. In the original languages called root languages of the earth: Hebrew, Sanskrit, cuneiform, Arabic. And the reason we're finding them there is because those sites are not necessarily alien ET UFO sites. I believe they are sites that were developed by us from another cycle of another civilization. When we worked together as a family on this planet, when we cooperated and achieved great and beautiful things. And my question is, if we were able to do things like that in the past, how much further could we go if we did the same thing right now with what we know today? Here's the beauty. Here we are on the verge of war, at a time when the cycles are converging, creating the tension in a time of extremes, and at exactly that time, we may find the evidence of us from another time that has the power to unify us rather than divide us. And I think we're going to see that very soon in our lifetimes. So what would that mean? What would it mean if we found something like that? And when we look at the advanced civilizations on Earth, why did those civilizations collapse? What happened in the past? Is there something that could have happened then that we've forgotten? Or maybe we chose to forget because whatever it was so painful, we didn't want to carry it into future civilizations. Well, I want to share with you another out-of-place artifact, an ancient clue that is happening in what is now Pakistan. It is in an area used to be between India and Pakistan, ancient sites, archaeological sites, such as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. We've known about these sites for a while. They're about 5,000 years before present is when we say they originated. Interestingly, it's the beginning of the last cycle. It also happens to be at the time of the last great climate change. What we're finding is evidence of an advanced society. An advanced society that had things in their time that we have in ours today. They had knowledge of mathematics, chemistry, architecture, advanced architecture, multi-story buildings. They had closed indoor plumbing, hot and cold running water, flush toilets, stained glass in their windows. They even had buried pipelines where there have been wires and remnants of cables and what are believed to be ancient batteries that have been found in these sites. So clearly, These were not primitive grass huts. These were advanced technological civilizations, and they had more. They had amazing art, beautiful art, using techniques of sculpture that we're only beginning to use now in the 20th century. But there are a lot of mysteries in these sites. Scientists, archaeologists also began to find evidence of what is called vitrified stone. What that means is that in the walls of the homes, for example, or in the floors made of quartz or granite that is made of quartz and feldspar and mica, some of the minerals, while they're still in place, they've been exposed to a heat that was so intense it melted the minerals in place. A high, intense, rapid heat that melted these minerals in place. And one of the mysteries, the archaeologists began to find these mysterious lumps of something. And it took them a while to understand that what they were looking at, these were lumps of clay that used to be clay vases and clay dolls that had also been vitrified. They were exposed to a rapid, intense heat. They were melted so quickly. All that's left now is a stone ball. So these kinds of things are the mysteries to the scientists. They're saying, what happened? What could have happened in this part of the world? Well, this is one of those places where you have to look beyond the evidence. If you look only at the evidence, you'll never understand what it is that happened. We need context. And some of that context is coming from the oral traditions of this part of the world, from the Hindu traditions of the Mahabharata, and specifically in the Bhagavad Gita, which is a small portion of the Mahabharata. This portion of the Mahabharata tells a story of an ancient battle that happened between two advanced civilizations a long time ago. It doesn't give the exact dates. And as these two civilizations clashed, one of them began to lose the battle, and they resorted to using a weapon that had never been used before, a technology that had never been used before. And they wrote about what the effects of this weapon were in a way that made no sense until the 20th century, because we had nothing to compare it to. What could have been seen in the eyes of the people living in Mohenjo-daro 5,000 years ago to prompt them to describe something that made no sense until the 20th century? Does Mohenjo-daro offer evidence of the unthinkable? And this is a question that scientists are asking themselves right now.
The motto of Richard Hoagland's website is, "To go boldly where someone has gone before." This tongue-in-cheek slogan is referring to what appear to be the remnants from an ancient civilization on the planet Mars. Richard also suggests that much of what we know as the U.S.-Soviet accomplishments in space are simply a camouflage for much deeper and more profound truths. Truths that we need to take a look at today to avoid a potentially similar fate as those civilizations that he says have disappeared.
In terms of this conference, I mean, we're at a processional conference, ancient wisdom. To me, the elegance is how the work I started 25, 30 years ago, trying to figure out, A, were the ruins real, and then B, once we figured out there was a geometry and a mathematics, that they were real and there was a message, and then trying to figure out what the message was supposed to tell us, is to see the convergence between that mathematical message and the whole theme of procession. Because it turns out that the guys who were on Mars, whoever they were, and in some of my models I say it was probably us, but I'm not stuck on that. It could easily be dissuaded that it's not us or our great-great-great-great-grandmothers. They had something profound to say in the form of this exquisite physics. It turns out that that physics is central, is absolutely central to figuring out the reasons for the precessional / yuga cycle and the drivers, how it works, why consciousness appears to rise and fall in this 26,000, 24,000 year period, and why we're here. And when I started this almost 30 years ago, I would never have imagined that we would get to that place where we actually can make coherent dot connections between very disparate scientific disciplines, from ethnology, archaeology, physics, torsion physics, which is the cutting edge of some of the work I talk about now, that it will all come together. And the only way that can happen is if you start from a place of realism. In other words, there had to really be ruins all along for the mathematics that we've learned from the ruins to turn out to have real world connections in the here and now.
And what you talked about, you never thought we'd get here. And another point you made is, but where did they go? What happened to them? Now that's a whole other story, right? You have ruins.
We're looking, starting with this planet, we're looking at a history of cultures that rise and fall, create magnificent stuff, and then leave stage right. And we have very little evidence of who they were, what they thought, what they believed, why they disappeared. And it now looks like we can extend that set of mysteries to other worlds. The first thing I noticed in looking at the Mars data is that those guys are no longer here. When I'm looking at stuff we found on the moon, and we found some pretty amazing, astonishing stuff recently, they're no longer there. Why? Why does there seem to be this finite lifetime for even the most extraordinary civilizations and cultures? Possible answer, they're driven by the same precessional yugal cycle that has caused cultures to appear and disappear on this planet. And it behooves us, I would think, if we would like to maintain our longevity and get better and get rid of things like wars and strife and conflict and, live on Earth the way someone intended we should live, it would behoove us, I think, to learn the lessons of why even these incredibly advanced cultures, the progenitors of whoever we're seeing in this set of ruins on Mars and the moon and other places, are no longer here. If we don't learn that lesson, then maybe we won't survive much longer either. And if it's within our power to figure out what we can do different, then it would be tragic if we did nothing and we stayed doing the same old thing.
Well, not to pick an argument here, but I did see on the internet a photo of Mars that had a Starbucks on it. I don't know if you saw that one.
I missed that. I missed that.
It was going around about a year ago. But anyway, speaking of great structures, one of the things you were talking about is this particular 19.5 degrees north and how many great structures geometrically are laid out at 19.5 degrees north. What is the significance of that? And can you go into that a little bit more?
Without the diagrams, it's hard for people to envision this. But in essence, we have, like the Da Vinci Code, we found at Cydonia a Cydonia code, which is not in language, it's in mathematics and geometry.
Cydonia, Mars, not Sedona, Arizona.
It's not Sedona, Arizona, it's Cydonia on Mars. That code resolves down to basically look to your tetrahedra. A tetrahedron is a four-cornered, four-sided geometric figure. And that kind of force structure, a standing wave pattern, not an actual tetrahedron, but an energy pattern that would look like that, appears to be in every spinning object we can see. And what that model predicts is that energy should come up at certain key positions on stars or planets or other spinning bodies that embody this geometry. And when we look at the solar system, we find these energy upwellings all over the solar system. We find them on Earth, we find them on Venus, we find them on Mars, we find them on Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Whenever there is a fluid, gaseous, dynamic situation with energy churning around inside a rotating ball, a planet or a star, the peak latitude of sunspots is 19.5 degrees. So that said to me early on, and we're talking now a decade or two, that this energy that's appearing in these worlds, and we know that the outer worlds of the solar system are actually radiating more energy into space than they're getting from the sun. So the energy has to be appearing from some other place. In our model, that place is hyperspace. It's another dimension. It then turns out there's a body of literature going back something like 100 years. The founding fathers of all the great physics that we think we know, people like Maxwell, and others, were looking at these hyperdimensional models until something went wrong and we went in a wrong direction. So I've always maintained that what we're doing is rediscovering these sciences. We're not discovering them.
Right.
And
well
that
said.
hooks into a lot of even more ancient texts and scriptures and archives in cuneiform and cylinder seals that speak about these kinds of energies and how they affect not only the planet but including consciousness itself.
Well, that's the interesting part. I mean, you have in India the tradition and the symbols of the Sri Yantra, which is one star tetrahedron buried into another, into another. You have the work of, in modern times, Drunvalo Melchizedek, who talks about the star tetrahedrons and also the Sri Yantra and flower of life. And so these images are being somehow recalled in mass and being injected back into the spiritual sciences now?
Well, they never really left. It's just our Western tradition, our Western culture has really divorced itself from any of that archetypal heritage material. As we're learning more at the physics level, as we're actually developing experiments that can prove some of these concepts, can test them, such as the Accutron experiment I talk about at Coral Castle.
That's fascinating.
We're rediscovering the old maxim that it's all one. There is no religion versus science. It's all a gradation. And in the ideal world, we never would have lost track of those connections. We wouldn't look with, downcast eyes upon, mainstream scientists or spiritually inclined people. They're part of a continuum, and you need both sets of eyes to understand the world. That's one of the extraordinary serendipitous benefits of tripping over a set of ruins on another planet and then finding that they actually have practical real-world uses.
And tripping over ruins here where it appears we also forgot how to make helicopters and spaceships and tanks. Can you talk about that? Because I love that one.
On the top lintel, a support lintel inside the Seti I temple at Abydos, there is this frieze which looks like a tableau depicting very technological things. Helicopters, submarines, tanks, stuff like that.
And they're literal, they're exact.
They appear to be exact analogs. Now, the critics say that they're what's called a pamplist, meaning that they were hieroglyphs that were plastered over and parts of the plaster has fallen off, giving us the illusion that they encode these things.
Yeah, but they look so intact.
They do, and I've had close-up pictures taken, and they don't look like palampus to me.
Right.
John West came up to me after my talk, and he said, Dick, it was all great, except you got to get rid of those slides. That's explained. It's just a trick of light and shadow, and I'm kind of amused because he was quoting to me very uptight mainstream Egyptologists.
Which he's not.
Which he's not. And John has been the object of a lot of scorn from those very same people. And what it shows me is that everyone has their limits. John cannot believe, given all he knows about Egypt, that Seti I would have immortalized and made sacred artifacts from a time that came before. I'm not obviously claiming that Seti I, in the Old Kingdom, had tanks and helicopters and all that hidden in some, tomb. What I'm claiming is that when he built that temple, which is right up against the Osirian, which is this incredibly much more ancient structure, purposes totally unknown, that appears to come from maybe 13,000 years ago, that he was trying to record and immortalize things which were secretly sacred to the priesthood of his time, almost like a remembrance of a Renaissance. Exactly when those things were functioning on Earth, I have no idea. We just have like a snapshot. The artisans, I believe, carved those things for a specific reason. I do not think they're palimpists, which is the way that word is described, meaning an accidental image created when the plaster falls off.
No, because every one of them is a technological machine that exists today.
And can be identified. And then,
Yes.
of course, I said to John, is it not possible that because of this physics-driven cycle, the concept of the Yuga cycle, there being golden ages and then shorter Bronze Ages and Silver Ages, and finally the Kali Yuga, which is the lowest age, that if we reincarnate again and again in specific ages, and the same designers and architects and technicians who built that stuff a long, long time ago are with us now, doing it again
Makes perfect
and
sense.
again.
I'm leaving it on that note because that's absolutely perfect, and thank you for bringing your super genius into what some think is still a pretty dark period, because I have faith that we're all going to do this together.
You're very kind.
Thank you. For more information on the big picture, meaning the precession of the equinox and all of its implications, you may also want to watch our interviews with Walter Cruttenden, John Major Jenkins, and John Anthony West. Until next time, thanks for watching.